Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. I've got more mini album reviews today. This is the 12th video in this series for 2026. Once again, just 7 albums to talk about today. And yeah, they're just in short form reviews as usual. And it's all just my personal opinion on these albums. You can disagree with me on any of them, and that's fine. It's just my opinion. And yeah, I'm not intending to go super in-depth. There may be things that I miss about the albums, but that's what happens when I do mini reviews. Anyway, let's get right into it, starting with... The other day, I decided to stay up really late listening to every Luke Combs album to prepare for this review, and I didn't realize that was exactly what I needed in that moment, as Luke Combs' approach to country music is just so damn likable, with the way he turns such simple messages and song concepts into powerful emotional tracks, and you can just tell by listening to his music how passionate he is about singing and songwriting, and often about the topics he's singing about as well. Also, I've got to correct that 4 out of 10 review I did of Growing Up on my blog a few years ago. That album is way better than I gave it credit for. Anyways, Luke Combs' albums tend to make for pretty easy reviews, and now coming off his heartwarming 2024 Father's Day album, which is probably his best, he's got his longest to date, running for over an hour and 10 minutes, and unfortunately, it's not one of his best, partially for being overly long, but also for some production nitpicks, where a lot of the time these songs could have had a lot more impact, and the melodies are very hit or miss, turning a lot of this album into filler for me. I say as if there weren't other problems. And even some of the songs that could have been really good just don't quite connect. Days Like These is a prime example, where Luke Combs is usually really good at pulling off these simple tunes about appreciating what we've got in life, but this song is just way too basic for even Luke Combs to fully save it. Still a pretty good song, but it should be so much better, as should Wish Upon a Whiskey, which is a nice emotional ballad, but something in the production on that track doesn't quite sit right with me and I can't fully place it. And then there's the songs I just don't like at all, like Sleepless in a Hotel Room with all its woes, and Alcohol of Fame for just being obnoxious and really corny. And Can't Tell Me I'm Wrong does go a bit into creepy territory where he's trying to convince this person that there's some connection between them when it doesn't sound like this person feels the same way. So if you want to know the record's best highlights, Seeing Someone is an interesting track, which makes good use of its title to refer to multiple different things, and it's definitely an album highlight. 15 Minutes is very classic Luke Combs, and compositionally it sounds like a song he's made a billion times before, but I think it mostly works with some unique content. Rethink Some Things is kind of on the sillier side, but I think Luke brings enough personality behind the mic that it works, especially with such a funky instrumental. And I also really like Tell 'Em About Tonight in the way that it celebrates a moment, and the instrumentation and vocal performance really make for a great anthemic track. And I also want to highlight the really emotional track Giving Her Away, sung to the father of the narrator's bride. And then for a late album highlight, I'd recommend The Me Part of You. So yeah, it's got its moments, but it's way too long with too much filler, and I can't help but feel at least a little disappointed, even as someone who's never fully loved an entire Luke Combs album. It's got enough highlights for me to give it a strong 6 out of 10, but it doesn't really work as a full album. Probably not his worst album, definitely not his best. Well, this is certainly an album I was interested in. It's been nearly 2.5 years since I reviewed Underscore's sophomore album Wall Socket on my blog, one of the rare reviews on said blog that I can actually read nowadays and feel pretty good about, especially considering my opinions on that album haven't really changed. That being that as much as I personally don't love that album, for pretty much any critique I have of it, I can also think of a counter-argument that I totally understand for why it works. And thus, I was really excited about this new album, although I didn't want to set my expectations too high, because we could once again be in for another album that's just not really my thing. Although there were some moments on Wall Socket that gave me hope that this might actually click for me. And this album has been absolutely showered with critical acclaim, just like that one was, so I knew I should at least give this a chance. And I'm sorry, but once again, I'm just not all that wowed. I do think this is pretty good, with solid production, some good melodies on songs like Bodyfeeling, Tell Me You Want It, and Do It. April is a good singer, and sometimes the lyrics can be quite creative, like on Music, which is intriguing right from its opening line. But often it feels like this meanders musically, like how Hollywood Forever barely does anything with its attempt at a groove, and toward the end starts sounding like a mediocre early 2010s dance pop song. And the following track, The Piece, is also quite uninteresting musically, as is most of Love Field, before the more bouncy finish at least makes up for it a little bit on the latter of those songs. So while I don't think this is a bad album by any means, and I will give it a 7 out of 10, and I probably like it more than Wall Socket, it is the less ambitious of the two projects, relying more on quirky sounds and experimentation rather than having as many meaningful layers and details as that album did. At least the way I see it. Maybe I'm wrong, but either way, I still think this is a mostly good album, but I'm still not fully won over, and even this album's standout tracks don't quite compete with her best. Still probably worth hearing, but I wouldn't set your expectations too high if I were you. This is solo studio album number 3 from Kim Gordon, probably best known as a member of the legendary no-wave and noise rock band Sonic Youth, and she's released 2 great industrial hip-hop / industrial rock projects, one in 2019 and the next just 2 years ago, and here she's back with her 3rd album. And yeah, once again we get a lot of the same writing style that feels both open to interpretation and shockingly straightforward, with endless quotables and a sense of humor that might disguise some of the darkness in what's really being said. And the production is strong as usual, and her performances are once again very good. And while I think maybe the formula is starting to get a bit dry, there's enough that makes this project unique, so it still feels like evolution from 2024 as a collective, even if I still probably prefer that album to this one. I really like the post-punk / kind of new wave groove on Not Today, which is executed quite well in the production and performance. Dirty Tech is a bit of an odd track where I'm not totally sure why it works, but it does, and SUBCON has some absolutely haunting keyboards in the background. And all throughout this project, it's both compelling and hard-hitting, and could end up being really goddamn catchy once I familiarize myself with the songs more. And the Bye Bye remix at the end of the album feels like the perfect kind of realistically non-shocking shock value aimed at far-right conservatives designed to piss them off for no reason. Not sure what the actual intent of the song was, but that's what comes to mind. So yeah, on my first couple listens, I wasn't totally sure, but I think she's gone 3 for 3. It's a great album, not her best, but still worthy of an 8 out of 10, and definitely worth listening to whether you're already into this kind of experimental hip-hop or experimental rock, or if you're looking for a jump-on point. Okay, so in my last mini-review, I talked about heavensouls' album Westside Trapped, and I also mentioned I might check out this album, which is a collaboration with another artist I'm not familiar with called Stickerbrush, as a duo known as the Side Pieces, who have now released an album 3 years in a row, and this is the first Side Pieces album that I've listened to, and it's called DARKLIGHT. I saw it labeled as experimental hip-hop, which is quite different from that other heavensouls album. This album came out 2 months earlier than Westside Trapped, and this was released right near the start of January, and while it didn't get as much acclaim as that album has so far, the reception seems to be generally positive. And okay, enough of my rambling, let's talk about the album. And for the first couple tracks, I was actually quite intrigued, as it seemed like the kind of experimental hip-hop that found a good balance between accessibility and avant-gardeness, where they would be daring without sacrificing the catchiness. But the more this album drags on, the less invested I become, and after a while it just becomes too much. And when I say this, I include the latter leg of the album when it goes in a more ambient direction that I also don't really like that much. And keep in mind this album's almost an hour. It kind of reminds me a little bit of listening to Death Grips, a band I'm not super familiar with, and I'll admit I'm probably overdue for another re-listen of their albums, but I've never been a huge Death Grips fan, and keep in mind my comparison here is not in the style of the music. No, not at all. Both are experimental hip-hop, but pretty much complete opposites in that subgenre. But my feelings when listening to this are kind of similar, where I initially might feel like, hey, this is pretty cool, before I go through the full album and just get sick of it. Although at least Death Grip's best moments made it all worth it, whereas here I'm just not that impressed at all. I guess I'll give credit to some mostly pleasant glitchy synths all over Drop a Couple. Everyday Fishing was a nice early album highlight, and probably one of the easiest tracks to enjoy in this album. Bomb Mix feels quite well crafted in its experimentation and might be one of the best produced songs here, and I'll admit the 11-minute closing track is a pretty good ambient piece to end the record, even though I would never go out of my way to listen to it on my own time. But then you get the god-awful mastering on treehouse music, no I don't care that it's intentional, and the annoying repetition that doesn't fit the vibe at all on Listen, and the staticky disjointedness of run-up freestyle that I don't think works at all. And more infuriatingly, the vast majority of this is just tedious to listen to. I don't want to come across overly negative and make this sound like the worst thing ever, because it's not that bad, but I do find it overly long and not particularly captivating. So for me it's a strong 5 out of 10, and while I can sort of see why some people might find it interesting, I can't say it's really doing much for me. This is album number 3 by Grace Ives, a singer and songwriter from New York who I'm not sure I'd heard of before this, and going into this without any idea what to expect and without having heard her first 2 albums, Well, it's a decent pop album with some decent writing that is definitely going to appeal to a certain audience, where the emotional resonance feels very narrowly targeted rather than broad, in about the simplest of ways. And when paired with its basic yet often effective pop approach, it can lead to some good songs like Dance With Me. Now, I don't really like the early Lana Del Rey vibes of songs like My Man's and Fire 2, and overall, this isn't the kind of album I'm probably going to remember much, especially with a lack of truly great songs. And I also don't love the production a lot of the time, maybe a bit over-polished. But the album's not bad for what it is. I think if you like artists like Sabrina Carpenter or Gracie Abrams, maybe even someone like Halsey, it might be worth a shot. But I'm not sure I'll remember this exists in a few months' time, and thus for me it's a 6 out of 10. It's not bad, but I wouldn't say it's all that good either. Seemingly out of nowhere, I started seeing a shocking amount of critical acclaim for this new album from Neurosis, an album that I've seen described as sludge metal, post-hardcore, and other adjacent genres. And keep in mind, I didn't really know who Neurosis were until now. Had I known about them before, I probably wouldn't have been quite as surprised, as this is apparently a legendary metal band formed in the 1980s who have put out many hugely acclaimed albums going back decades. And then came the hiatus in 2019, following founding member Scott Kelly being kicked out of the band for abusing his family, and now a surprise release of this new album. Now, as much as I like some post-hardcore and other similar genres of heavy music, I know absolutely nothing about this band's music and just went into it knowing about the huge amount of acclaim that it's getting, so I was ready to be underwhelmed. And honestly, I'm put in a bit of a tricky spot with this album, because I don't want to accidentally overhype it too much, considering just how much attention it's gotten already, but I also will admit I did end up liking it more than I thought I would, and it's actually some pretty damn solid post-hardcore. It's well produced, the vocals are not totally a style I always love, but it does bring some nice impact that mostly fits with the vibe, and while I'm not sure I'm totally interpreting all the lyrics properly, there do seem to be themes of a lack of control and being fucked over by both systems controlled by humans and also natural ones. For example, death, discussed on the closing track. And I think for a punishing listen filled with musical tension, it's good for what it is. Now, the album does take a bit to get going and hits some weaker moments throughout, and it's a bit lengthy, running for over an hour, not all of which I think was totally justified. But hey, when the best moments hit this hard and there's enough unique experimentation and real grooves that add to the musicality but don't take away from the emotion of this project, yeah, I guess it's a light 8 out of 10. And while I'm not sure I'm fully as amazed by this album as so many others are, it is very good and I can see where the hype comes from. I'm just not totally on board myself. Still absolutely glad I gave this a chance though. And finally, to end this video, the newest project from Yonaka, and when I saw this English rock band had a new album out, the band name immediately rung a bell from their song Ordinary, which I really liked as a kid, and re-listening to it, I can say it's a pretty good song, but I also was overhyping it at the time, and it makes sense that I haven't listened to it probably in years. Anyway, I had no idea what to expect from this album 5 years later, as someone who doesn't really know much about this band. And okay, it's not bad, but I also wish I liked it a lot more. There seems to be an overall theme on this album of a one-sided relationship where the narrator has been taken advantage of time and time again, and it can lead to some emotional moments like At the Beach and Best of Me. And I like the constant changing of emotions and behaviors throughout this album, which could represent how the narrator's mind is being fucked with. And I'll admit this album uses a production style I'm not really a huge fan of, with a real lack of dynamics and a very squished together sound, if that makes any sense. But I've also heard this done much worse, and at least the vocals aren't getting completely buried all the time. In fact, I think this style works really well on Eat You Alive, which is a great song that could have been absolutely transcendent if the chord progression had a bit more variety in the chorus. But look, all things considered, I do think this album is pretty standard for this kind of electronic rock. Teresa Jarvis is a really good singer for most of this album, but even despite my praising of the lyrical ideas, I don't think the writing is the strongest, and the songs don't really back it up for the most part. The production is okay, not awful, but not really my thing, and I just find the compositions and instrumental performances kind of bland, at least as someone who listens to so much goddamn music. And thus, I'm not sure this is worth going back to outside of maybe a couple songs. But while it's a 6 out of 10 for me, I do kind of see the appeal of an album like this. As a teenager, I probably would have absolutely eaten this up myself. So it might be worth a shot if anything that I've said about it sounds interesting. Alright, thank you for watching. As always, this is just my personal opinion on these albums. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments section. Let me know what you think of these albums and or what you think of my video. And yeah, I'm bad at doing these outros, but I think that's all I gotta say for now. I will hopefully be back with more videos very soon. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all later.